Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me for another Alfred Hitchcock Presents review. Today I will be talking about Season 3, Episode 16, Sylvia, starring Todd as Sylvia and John McIntire as John. And unfortunately, I have to say, this is a really, really bad episode in my opinion. Definitely a contender for the worst Alfred Hitchcock Presents episode that I've seen up to this point in the first 3 seasons. And I think there's 3 main reasons for this. Number one, this episode presents itself kind of like a psychological drama, and in my opinion, the psychology aspects of this episode really weren't convincing at all. Number two, there's a father-daughter relationship that's very important to buying into this episode, and it just didn't work for me. I don't know if it's because the actors are so close together in age or just because the script isn't written that well, but this dynamic between the two of them just didn't work for me. And number three, and worst of all, this episode is very slow and boring, in my opinion, and just not very eventful until the end. And even then, the end just fell flat for me and didn't work. So we start with a woman named Sylvia and her father, John. And they're talking, and Sylvia has a gun, and her father's concerned about this. He's not sure why she has it. So they chat, and we learn some background story. We learn that John is supposed to go on a trip. He's concerned about leaving his daughter alone because it turns out his daughter has gone through a divorce, and John is not sure if she's over it yet or not. So at this point, we get a scene where the maid tells John, Sylvia gave me some time off, a vacation. So John is wondering why Sylvia wants to be alone. So being even more concerned, he goes to talk to Sylvia's doctor and he tries to get information out of him. The doctor says, I can't give you much information, but he basically tells John, if you give me the story from your point of view, maybe I can help. So this is just a way for us to get some exposition, basically. So we get a flashback, which adds nothing to the episode, in my opinion, where Sylvia and her father are talking. We're introduced to this guy, Peter, who is the man that will wind up being Sylvia's husband. And we learn that John and Peter didn't get along very well. John tells the doctor. It turns out that Peter forged a check. He was after money the whole time. He didn't really care about Sylvia. So John agreed not to press charges against him, basically, if Peter agreed to divorce Sylvia and never see her again. So after we get a brief scene with Sylvia and the gun again, which just seemed to remind us that Sylvia was in the episode. There's no real point to it. Kind of like this whole episode, no real point to it in my opinion. We get another scene between Peter and John, this time in present day. And Peter says basically, Sylvia wants me back, but all he's really after is money. So John gives him money, and that's the last we see of Peter in the episode, which is just as well because I don't think Peter's that interesting of a character either. So Sylvia and her father talk again. He tells her that Peter's not coming. Sylvia seems very, very upset about this. They chat about the gun again, and Sylvia says she was going to use it to kill Peter if he didn't agree to take her back. So at this point, Sylvia flips out even more. She says she wants to go on a trip, but her father says maybe you should go back and start seeing your doctor again. So Sylvia agrees and decides to go up to, I think it's her room. So her father calls the doctor when he realizes he's left Sylvia alone with the gun again and not really being sure if she would harm herself. He goes upstairs and asks for the gun, but instead Sylvia makes this speech about how she's never had nothing of her own. Again, the episode tries to get psychological here, but nothing has been built up to lead to this moment. There have been hints made, but this just didn't work for me. It seemed like Sylvia's speech kind of came out of nowhere. And at this point, of course, the ending is also very predictable. Instead of hurting herself, Sylvia decides she's going to shoot her father. And then we get this melodramatic ending, which was way over the top and didn't really work for me either, where Sylvia's just kind of sitting there very upset. And I was happy when this episode ended at this point and didn't really care, to be perfectly honest. So overall, Sylvia is a very poor episode, and I'm going to give it a 1.5 out of 5. I definitely do not recommend watching this episode. There's a few, scenes here and there that aren't terrible, but most of this episode just doesn't work at all, and I do not recommend it. So 1.5 out of 5 for Sylvia, and as always, thank you very much for watching.